Good morning. Sorry for the time zone confusion.
Oh, no, don't worry. That's not exactly your fault. How are you?
Good.
Good. I don't think you saw my email, Peter. I've added you, if you don't mind. Can you have a look at the Future of Text website?
Sure thing. Give me a second. Publishing or lab or which one?
Front page, under advisors.
Okay, let's find that.
Under the concept map view.
Okay, future of tech.
Well, you see the concept map view, the big image, the YouTube thing, right?
Yeah, the YouTube thing. I see that. Yeah.
Yeah, so below that is my advisors, so you're in there now.
Thank you ever so much. Deeply honored.
Oh, I'm glad you're happy with that.
Very much so.
Because I didn't well, I asked your permission in an email, but it was one of those many emails, so I wasn't sure if you'd seen it. So it's good to attest. Yeah, I mean, to be honest, this page is supposed to get me work. So initially, I was only putting down the famous people, and I realized, who are the actual people? That's you guys. So it would be kind of stupid not to. And even put down my advisors at the university, even though I should ask Wendy if she's still considered part of my. Well, she was anyway. So Les and Dave said I should just put her down anyway. So whatever. Anyway, so that's that. I saw Brandel was here earlier, briefly too. I wonder if he's coming back in. Hello, David.
Hey there.
So you have a.
How are you?
You have a blurry background. I want to show you my real background today.
Oh,
Okay, hang on a second.
Oh, you're getting snow too?
oh,
Yeah, this is not a Zoom background. This is outside. Yeah, I'm at my mom's.
where
place in
is
Norway.
that?
Norway, Bergen.
Norway. Snowing right now?
Yeah.
A little bit?
So it's supposed to take about 2 hours to fly. Yesterday it took 12. It was a bit of an adventure. With one of the issues was on a connecting flight, which we shouldn't have to take. The the pushback truck that pushes the airplane. It was frozen solid to the aircraft, so they had to get other vehicles to move it. When they tried to spin it away, it just it had no traction. So yeah, bit
Wow.
embarrassing.
You didn't grow up in Norway, did you?
Partly,
You did? Okay, wow.
yeah. Yeah, on Friday we went, my wife and I, to a friend's birthday party. It was an axe throwing competition, and the slogan of the place is "Unleash your inner Viking." Never thrown an axe in my life, but I did come second. So maybe there was a genetic thing there. I don't know. Maybe
You look
violence.
good with one of those horns hats.
Yeah, except Peter, you obviously know they're not real and never were, right?
Oh, I'm devastated. I mean, they didn't have hats with the horns like that?
No, it was an Englishman, a bit like
It
Mr.
was just Hager the
Anderson.
Horrible comic strip then?
No, not true. No, there was some corpse found with drinking vessels or something, and they were close to the head. And this Englishman decided, "Oh, wouldn't that be fun?" So yeah. But David, are you in Mexico?
I'm in Tulum, Mexico. Yeah, I've been here for almost 2 years now. I leave a little bit during the summer, go home to the Bay Area for about a month, usually.
I've never heard
probably
of the
will try to
place
stay
before
anonymous.
you, and then suddenly it's all over the place. We have someone who is in some sort of transportation called Mr. iPhone. Hello, Mr. iPhone. Hang on, I'm gonna pin you. So, Fabien, where are you?
I will show you. I will try at least. Can I flip the camera? I'm in Strasbourg at the European Parliament because there is two places, one in Brussels where I'm all the time, but exceptionally there for the other committees and whatnot, it's the Strasbourg offices.
So you're just rubbing Mark and my faces in this, the fact that we've been excluded from this. That's a horrible thing of you. Brexit sucks.
Yes, I think it's fair to rub it though.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. Talking of rubbing it in, we need to decide on symposium this year. Vint wasn't too eager to go to Norway, but he also says he has real time trouble this year, so he may not be able to do anything. So that gives us more freedom. Should we give him another week and then we decide on a place and time?
Sounds good to me.
Okay, good.
Yeah, me too.
So Fabien, what are you actually going to be doing there? And he's frozen. Oh, there he is. Oh, wow. Is that a double helix staircase?
Yeah.
It's kind of amazing. That is very impressive.
Wow.
I'll stop the Wi-Fi. It's not reliable when I move from place to place, but yeah, it was a double helix staircase, and that's the actual parliament inside that like giant sphere.
So what are you going to be doing there? I didn't hear if you already said it.
I'm actually mostly for indoor geolocation tests. So that's a huge building. It's actually a set of buildings connected one to the other, and also to clarify a bit, if I flip again here, this building, the floor I'm in is for people working here, but that floor is just for visitors. And then the staircase over there after going through, so basically they intertwine VIP, people working there, visitors, so that visitors can have a sense, let's say, of properly being in the place, not the visitor in a corner and another. So trying to show how to navigate through this. And using augmented reality so that we can see the path and eventually additional information, like if there is a committee in a certain building or room, what's happening there. And ideally, but it's not done there yet, the place to point going all the way from an office to a specific chair.
Yeah, oh, look at that. Yeah, very cool.
Can we get a good look at that double helix staircase again?
Yeah, sure. I'll look around a bit and show you. I'll go up the staircase, maybe get a better view. I admit I enjoy also when I can to go to an impressive architectural building so that I can rethink of the design of virtual spaces. Can I put all my notes in there? Does it make sense? Is the design helpful to put objects that don't have the same constraints? And it's definitely a bit different than let's say, just a cube.
I wonder if anyone make the double helix escalator. That would be the ultimate cool.
I did go on a curved escalator in Shanghai once, so it can be done. That would be a very, very cool idea, yes. I had a meeting with my advisors today, which is always a joy. And, you know, looking at some of the early Doug stuff and so on, it's easy how, it's funny how easy it is to get away from it, to get bogged down in all kinds of issues. And then you look at some of these founding documents, it's like, obviously we should be prioritizing here and there. So I'm wondering if there's something we should do as a community to righten the ship a little bit in a way. There it is.
Ooh.
How many floors?
I think 4 or 5. Not sure.
So, Fabien, you are French, working in Luxembourg, right?
Nearly. I'm French, but working in Brussels.
Oh, Brussels. I'm so sorry. Thanks for that. It's so bizarre. I have 2 female French friends from 2 different countries. They're still French, complicated, whatever. That, you know, and I'm just going to do a reality check with you. I had to order something quite expensive over the phone today, and the woman in England, she had a very slight French accent. But the reason I'm mentioning it is, even though I was buying something quite expensive, some medical stuff from her, there was always this tone in her voice that if I don't do it her way, she's going to be annoyed, so I better behave. It was just the oddest things. Like, hang on, I just asked a question for clarification, and I was like, no, have you not read the email? You know, but they do it in such an elegant way. It's just the weirdest thing. I don't know if that sounds familiar or if I'm just being a horrible foreigner.
Well, no, it's the elegant part. I'm not sure, but for sure being irritated or impatient, and sometimes letting it leak through, not being able to necessarily hide it, is definitely possible.
Okay, so I wasn't completely way off mark then. Sorry, I'm just moving my camera so I can see you guys better. Okay. Right, anything specific for today? Now that we specifically have Fabien walking and distracting us with views of all kinds of things. I've been following what you've been doing on Twitter, of course, Fabien, with the piano type system. That's really, really interesting. Is anything you maybe want to update us now that could spark a discussion?
Sure. It's not easy for me to show my screen, so I'll try to describe as best as I can. So the piano thing is I bought a MIDI piano 2 weeks ago, more or less, and it's a cheap piano, like or a synthesizer. I mean, it's affordable one, like $100. But because it uses MIDI, then I can know with the computer which key it's being pressed on. And I thought in terms of pedagogy, that is like the most useful kind of feedback. Because if you know which key, you can know if it's the right key or not, assuming you're not, let's say, somebody doing improvisation with already a great sense of music, then you want to learn which key is which, and if it's the right one against, for example, a score. On top of this, I added a video projector, and I aligned the video projector with the keys. So that, for example, let's say if the key is a C, then the video projector can project on it the letter C. or drawing the score with the key at the beginning and then the note, and even with a little color, because there are some mappings between colors and different keys for usually kids or people who want to learn music, but they don't know yet how to read solfège. So yeah, I've been playing with this recently, and the last bit on this, which was I think 2 days ago, is I showed it to someone. I showed them a photo where you can see the keyboard with the projector on it, showing the different colors and the scores. And then the person tried to type on the photo. I was like, well, this is stupid and this is smart. It's stupid because it's a photo, you can't interact with it, but it's smart because I shouldn't have to go back home, find the physical keyboard and do the thing in order to either showcase it or at least tinker with it. And basically the outcome of this, or the principle from that, was to try to be as responsive in terms of design as possible, so that if the thing you're building, prototype, product, whatever, is accessible, working through any kind of device, then you don't need to go back home to think about it. You can play with a version of it, even if it's not necessarily the quote unquote full one. And I thought that was a good design principle. You don't want to go back home behind your desk to think about the thing you're working on or having to think with. So yeah, that was. I'll share the tweet in the chat after. But I'm wondering, yeah, how if people do this, if you're designing with responsiveness in mind, in order to always be able to improve anywhere you are, and if so, how to do that better.
It is intriguing how on the surface level this is so simple. You know, you have a physical keyboard, but because it has MIDI, it can be used in such a way. You know, it's interesting. Anyone else have any thoughts?
No.
Come on, guys. We can't do everything with a regular QWERTY keyboard.
Oh, by the way, just on the corded aspect, I found, I think, on Reddit, a keyboard, like a computer keyboard, because I was showing you my keyboard maybe 3 weeks ago, and it's a small keyboard in the sense that I don't have like hundreds of keys, but I think 66 or less. And then I think that Peter asked if it was chorded. So the idea is, again, just like in music, you can play one note at a time or one key, or you can play multiple ones at a time. And in music, that might make something beautiful. But when you type, if you're not a stenograph, then it's going to randomly put one key after the other, basically, or at least unpredictably. Whereas if you have a chorded keyboard, then it might make a specific new key. Let's say if you do the A and B key together, it's going to do the C key, for example. So see the example, but here's the idea. And what I saw on Reddit was this guy who designed a keyboard, a chorded keyboard with I would say 12 keys maybe, and they were able to type as fast and as precisely as we do with our 100+ keys keyboard, but with something much smaller, which I'm pretty sure for their own how do you say, let's say long-term pain is going to be in terms of physiology much nicer than just like extending our little pinky in a very unnatural way. So I admit I did not, I considered trying it, But I'm wondering how challenging coding can be in terms of basically a trade-off between memorizing the different chords and the benefit you get from typing without moving your hands as much. Now, I'll put the link also in the chat for that keyboard. It's all open source, can be 3D printed. Yeah. The author of it say, oh, it's super obvious and simple. I think not, but it's definitely interesting. Different ways to do inputs for text.
Well, I just dropped in a link to the Steno keyboard that I have, which I absolutely love, even though it's probably going to take me about a year to be able to memorize the Steno system to actually be able to use it.
So this is where I enter to just be annoying and talk about how amazing speech to text is these days. And it's because I'm not fighting against the two different kinds of keyboard. Absolutely not. What I mean is speech to text is really powerful, but it takes a while to learn how to actually use it. For instance, just to remember that you can, you know, my wife, she's very, very clever, a researcher by day. But, you know, she will type things into the Google thing or the address thing on her phone, as opposed to click on the microphone and just speak it. And when you move your phone away, it does the search. Because it didn't used to be good. Now it's become so good that you just expect it to work. It's kind of incredible. But of course, there are many controls where you don't want to speak. You know, I'm not at all arguing against that. Like Doug Engelbart's example of skiing downhill. You don't want to tell your skis, 10 degrees left.
I also found it's got to the sort of stage of convenience where if there's something, it's like an old PDF where there's no OCR text, or the OCR is so abysmal that it's not usable, that actually just speaking, transcribing sort of short snippets are less hassle than just typing them up. And it does seem a lot improved too from some years back when I last tried using speech to text quite a bit, in that there seems to be less of the thing where you end up with something that's dictionary correct but completely meaningless, whereas the mistakes it makes now are sort of more like human. Oh, right, I spelt that wrong, rather than I just got a word out of the dictionary that seemed to be a close match that renders the written text unintelligible. So that's a nice little sort of silent advance too.
Tell my wife I'm just showing how accurate speech to text has become.
Do you want to change it or send it?
Send it.
Done.
It's pretty good, right? It's kind of crazy.
So it is pretty good for typical or popular words of the English language, and for even more so for a native English speaker. But if I, as a French guy with a slight accent, it's less accurate. And also if I don't do, how do you say, popular words, or even if I do punctuation, that's my biggest challenge, let's say, with programming, is there's going to be a lot of parentheses, and just saying the word is like quite long, whereas it's one single character. So I think for saying sentences, popular sentences in English that don't include punctuation, it might be worth it. As soon as you include weird things like punctuation or I don't know what, shortcuts, I don't have the same success.
Yeah, I share the thought of speaking in a regular expression. Left paren, left brace, backslash.
And that's without even thinking about it. Like I need to visualize a regular expression, and I think saying it aloud, I don't know, it doesn't involve the same. So it's very different. I can't even think of it.
Oh, I'm not, Fabien, I'm not at all disagreeing with that. I completely agree. I'm just saying it's interesting how that also, even when it works, you have to be trained how to use it effectively. I'm sitting here doing corrections for my thesis. There's no way I'm going to dictate, even if it's perfect, because it uses a completely different part of the brain. So, but what is interesting also is, you know, all of you know I've got a new monitor and I scream about it a lot, and it's changed my outlook, pun intended. It's given me a different perspective, pun intended. So I'm wondering now that you're doing this, how obviously there were these mice that were big balls before. You could, you know, remove 3D objects and stuff. You know, you're talking about literal buttons, which may not be that different from a normal keyboard, except for their portability and smaller size. But do you think that what you're looking at can be a different kind of augmentation, how we interact, even when we have the opportunity to use a full keyboard?
I think it's a little bit what I tried to express a week or two ago when I saw another a smaller keyboard. Is initially we tend to think more is better, so more keys going to give us access to more things, functions, shortcuts, whatnot. And I find those smaller keyboards, including the last one I showed, the corded one, to be very counterintuitive. Like, why do we want less keys? And I think it's that trade-off between movement, how much our fingers move, and how much we need to remember, versus just seeing the key and pressing it. But I think it's not just as compact. It's like a new way to interact with the keyboard, because you basically see what's the name, layers. So the shift key, control key, whatever. When you combine that with another one, so it's basically slightly more complex, but you have to think about it. But it opens up, surprisingly enough, or maybe counterintuitively enough, despite the smaller size, more possibilities.
Yeah, I mean, an interesting thing here is, of course, particularly for use in VR, XR spaces, because there's been this fascination with the fashion of only hands, which I think it appears Apple's headset will only have hand gestures for controls. But anyway, it will, of course, be very interesting to see how many tools we can bring into this space.
Isn't part of the thinking your comment about, you know, well, where's the utility of these things? I think the hard part often is to see it before you need a certain degree of commitment or exposure before they make sense. I mean, we'll just witness, although it was about a screen and not a keyboard, your point you just made about, actually now I've got this bigger screen, I have a slightly different perspective. And I do remember when smartphones were first coming in, and at the time I traveled very little. And so all these affordances I was being told about just didn't make any sense, because I had something more powerful and bigger and easier to use in front of me, to wit a sort of, you know, a desktop computer. And it was only when I started doing a lot more traveling that the point of some of these things began to make sense, which in turn encourages you to engage with them. I don't think that a lot of these things necessarily make sense to the broad audience, simply because the benefit is just not apparent at first sight. Because in essence, you haven't been through the pain that you're avoiding by learning to use it, I guess, is the other way to look at it.
Yeah, I think so, and especially, well, the pain is really, I had pains in my wrist, so I could definitely feel it. But it's true that you need basically some investment. You need to bet on it, and it might be a bad one. Maybe for example, speech recognition is going to improve so much that spending hours and hours memorizing, being super frustrated because you make a shortcut that actually deletes what you were thinking about, typing and thinking about, and you have to go back to it. So it's definitely means you need to consider commitment, and it's rational if you don't know how much you're going to use a tool, to say, okay, I do the one with the shortest learning curve, basically.
Yeah, I suppose it's also difficult if there's a sort of thing that you have to use in order to engage with some process, then you sort of have to do that. Presumably, one of the added sort of complications is something like an alternative input device is that there's nothing forcing you to use it by your desire to use it, if you see what I mean. Because you could actually go and use a full keyboard for sake of argument, and it might not be convenient where you are. So I can see there's an added degree of sort of effort individually one has to make to engage with it.
I'm trying to drag you over to an iPad now, by the way. I hope your heads don't hurt. It's not
We all
working.
got smaller.
It's the big display, but it's not very useful. Oh, it's not working.
So you didn't bring your screen with you?
Don't even talk about it.
We could always get another one.
Yes, and then yeah, that's a great idea because then I'd also have to get a new wife. So two in one. That's not a bad idea. Oh, you're funny. Yeah.
Okay,
So
just sorry, just for the lack of second screen or big screen and how you can't. I mean, you could travel with it or buy a second one, but it's something I will probably have to work on. So going to Strasbourg here was interesting, but I have an empty office, as if I was hot desking basically, and it's okay, but it feels a little bit a misuse of the space. I have a bunch of empty walls, and I wish I had simple things. Let's say at first, at least like the calendar. The whiteboard I have in Brussels, I wish it was there, so I could keep on working on the thing I was working on. Some of the prototyping design rules I wrote down, they should be there, and ideally they should be spatialized so that I can just walk in the room and yeah. So I'll probably tinker with a prototype using Nextcloud. It's an online repository where you can put documents. PDF, 3D models, whatever, it doesn't really matter. And ideally to make it, to bring my virtual office with me from either Strasbourg to Brussels, and to ideally also have it not just fixed documents, but live ones, either notebooks or whatever in the remote directory at that time.
Couldn't you repurpose? It used to have, I don't know if they still have them. You used to get those little telepresence robots, were basically a screen on a stand. Of course, the only problem is it'd be fine to get it to walk in front of you until you turn the corner, and of course, because it won't know till you turn that you've turned. I guess it's the rubbish. Human job of the future is being a screen Sherpa, walking around carrying a screen on your back so the person behind can read it.
But it's actually funny that you mention it, because it goes about a bit to what Freud was saying about the speech recognition. Is actually, I do have one, and I did need to get a capture of my whiteboard in Brussels, but I did not dare ask a colleague. I thought, okay, I don't want to bother them with something that silly. So I should have used the remote telepresence robot to do it, but it's just not in my workflow. It's still like a crazy thing that's still out there. So there is indeed the technology being there, having access to it, and still on top of this, just having the presence of mind to say, oh, wow, this is part of my arsenal of tools. I must use it. Yeah, I completely skipped that part. But
I think that relates to the thing we're talking about, even just having the, as we say, affordance of speech to text. It's easy to just not use it. And obviously talking about something else, but it's the example of we have the ability, doesn't mean we use it. I mean, I did think of bringing the headset to Norway for this trip, but the thing is, for extended work, the screen door effect is just too annoying for text. And, if you guys were using the headset, then I would bring it so we could have a meeting in VR, because it is just interesting. Not necessarily for all meetings. Sometimes it's better with this kind of, smaller presence meeting.
Yeah, and then we could all have
trying to
virtual
click on the
snow.
big screen. That's why I keep doing these buttons. Sorry about that. Yeah. What was that, Mark? Sorry.
I said, and then we could all have virtual snow.
Yes. Oh, except here it stopped. So yeah, I'd have to have virtual snow too. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. So this year, I guess we are continuing with a large focus on VR, although not exclusively, right? Peter, what do you want this year to be? More educational, more VR, or what direction? And also, David, same question goes to you.
More on the educational, a little less on the VR. I think there's a lot we can do just exploiting 2D that we haven't done yet before we extend into 3.
I would say that we need to address AI in some way, just because it's so disruptive at the moment. Could be done in the VR, but also beyond that as well.
Yeah, I got an email back from Apple. I had asked them as a developer if there is an API where I can spawn a screen, just like I can spawn a window. It took them a month to reply, and they said there's no such publicly available API. I'm sure that'll change when the reality headset comes off the ground. Well, I mean, the thing is, Peter, I know you have a reticence. Tell me if I'm right, actually. Do you have a reticence with headsets because of the company Facebook and also because of movement sickness?
Both.
So with movement sickness, when you sit down, there is none. Unless you do a joystick in a game to move around, if you're in an environment where you have things on the walls and such, there's no motion sickness. Would the rest of you agree with me on that? One thumb.
I don't. I mean, I don't find I get motion sickness, but then I spent ages at sea, so I don't. I mean, it's one of those sort of things that, you know, some people get seasick on wet grass. So it's if you're prone to you know, seasickness or motion sickness, I suspect, you know, you will be anyway. So it's not necessarily a limitation of the technology. It's probably a human limitation, just in the way that, you know, all of us are good at some things and not good at others.
Well,
That makes sense to me. I don't get sickness very often.
I mean, it is definitely a limitation of the technology. That I don't argue with. But I think the thing that, excuse me, was the biggest learning of doing Bob's mural was that if you did the joystick to move up to it, I would feel a bit queasy after a while. It's like, you know, weird. But if I did the pinching so that my brain thought I wasn't moving, but it was moving, absolutely none. You know, that's one thing. The other thing is I tried a week or so ago, one of the military ones, because they're putting a lot of effort in. It was kind of interesting. And, you know, one thing that's really cool is on your body, you have the different equipment. So if you want to use your mic to talk to someone, you have to click here. If you want the map, it's on your back. If you want a different gun, ammo, all these things. So that's cool. But regarding motion, I found that if I'm standing, if I move only forward with the joystick, and I, you know, move my physical body, if I do a turn, then it's not so bad. So I'm wondering why games haven't tried that, to where the only thing you have, let's say, not a real soldier walking, but like a spaceship propellant thing, you only have forward thrusters. You have to move your body to move the spaceship. It would be interesting to see if that reduces motion sickness. I don't know why this is at all. It may be that we perceive frontal motion in a different way than, you know, this kind of motion. Maybe it's just, I don't know. But Peter, honestly, if you sit down, you have your spaces and do all that stuff. Sorry. Boom. Right.
Well, traditionally,
yeah.
the motion sickness is just the difference between your visual input and your oral input. you know, the sort of the balance sensors are saying I'm moving up and down, and you're looking somewhere that says, you know, you're sat maybe inside something that's moving up and down. Your eyes are saying, nope, you know, the wall is still in front of me. And basically, that's the point where the stomach gives up and votes.
Almost. Sorry, Emily is just texting me about some medical thing. Boom, done. I think it is your brain's perceived input. That's why this amazing thing about Bob Horn's, you know, the visual thing is the same.
Mhm.
But if you do it this way, no problem. Do a joystick, problem. I find that absolutely insanely interesting. But the other part of it, Peter, crying out loud. Sorry, guys. Boom. Okay. Sorry about this.
No problem.
All right. Boom. Okay. Anyway, the other thing, Peter, as far as the whole VR thing, actually, I'm asking the rest of you, can you log into a Quest now without Facebook credentials? No, still cannot. Okay. David, I can't remember. Do you have a headset?
I don't have one at the moment.
The company-wise, I'd feel a lot more comfortable getting an Apple rig than a Facebook rig.
Yeah, but there's a huge problem associated with that. Huge problem, I think, and that is when the Apple one is ready, the reality headsets, it's game over, man. Whatever their basic interactions are, that will be ossified, stratified, and that will be what the world will do going forward. It's like the invention of the GUI. So that's why I think it's, of course, there will be Linux soldiers. I'm looking at your eyes, Fabian. Of course, there will be some outliers. But I mean, one of the things we've talked about is when you're in a virtual space, where is there? Just as a context for different companies. So let's say we've opened a book and it's a traditional book just for fun in a VR space or XR or AR, it doesn't matter. And, you know, that's fine, it's there. But if you now decide you want all the pictures out to go somewhere, where are they? Are they somewhere there in relation to your virtual room, in relation to you, to your head, to the book? You know, these are really, really important questions because they come down to ownership. If you have someone else in that room and you do that action, do they have access to those files? Or are they seeing a JPEG projection? Or are they seeing something blurry? Or are they seeing nothing? What happens when you leave the room? Right? All of these things Apple will own. They will own it because they have the Mac and iOS. Meta didn't have that. That's why they're a bit crap. You know, when I do the headsets with the virtual screen, it's okay, but they don't have any of my data. They don't have any of my stuff. So all they can do is frame it from someone else's OS. So that's why I think it's so crucial to play with silly keyboards like Fabienne is doing and come up with all kinds of ideas of just, we just have to do it. The sillier, the better. Because you know, when Tim Cook takes the stage, it's got to be so slick and people think it's the only way. Sorry, that's my speech and I do it monthly.
But then again, you know, there's the issue that if you, I mean, you know, people will build what they can, but often that's built for somebody sitting on a T1 line the whole time. And it turns out that lots of other people aren't getting quite the same experience. And I think what you said, so it may shift norms to ones that are just inconvenient. So what the vendor would like you to do and what you're capable of doing will probably be quite different.
I don't understand.
I just think to previous sort of technology coming in, it'll work in a slightly different way. But I suspect there will be the same issues because you know, people tend to overlook the sort of the last mile bit and the bits that don't quite work.
Yeah, but Mark,
It's always on.
Let's look at what Apple already has. They have continuity in so many ways. I can copy a phone number or whatever on my phone, paste it on my Mac. That's just automatic. I can take my cursor from any Apple device over to any other Apple device with that setup. That's automatic. They own an entire depth of infrastructure and ecosystem. So even, they're saying that the Reality OS won't need an iPhone or anything, which is interesting. But I can promise you, when you put it on, all your data will be there in a really cool looking manner. But the way, just like with Microsoft Office, you could do a lot of good stuff, but it was in Microsoft Office.
But then, as a small counter to that, for instance, things that don't just work, it transpires that a lot of this interconnection doesn't work. So my iPhone and my Mac are on the same network, but my Mac is connected directly to the router, the switch, and so not using Wi-Fi, and the phone's on Wi-Fi, so they don't talk and things don't move. So I still basically have to text or message myself information, or I've got to take my Mac off the main link, off the Ethernet, and put it onto Wi-Fi. At which point, somebody will roll their eyes and say, well, why don't you use Wi-Fi? But the answer is, well, why the hell should I use Wi-Fi? It's all on the same network. If the equipment's so dumb it can't work that out, what is so clever about it?
Well,
So I just offer that as an example of where people don't really think these things through in terms of, when they talk about them working seamlessly together. Seamlessly from whose perspective?
Well, I have the same setup as you, but I leave the Wi-Fi on and it works.
But
I
if
use
you
an Ethernet cable to my Mac now because the Wi-Fi at home is really bad, and it works just fine.
Except you'll end up with then the Mac has a problem, because if you have it connected via the Wi-Fi and the Ethernet, what you find is you get all sorts of weird networking issues where it calls itself, MacBook 146, because said this name, 145 is already in use. Anyway, it's not to go down a rabbit hole, but I'm just making the general point that I think we always assume all this stuff's going to work and be seamless, and I would say my experience of equipment is it's never been quite like that, despite best efforts.
No, that's fair enough, Mark. But there are many points we can discuss. But do we agree that when Apple comes out, it won't do everything. It'll be very limited, but it'll be very flashy and impressive. Do we agree with that? All of us. Is that
No,
no?
I'm absolutely. I absolutely don't care about it. Like I'm waiting for it. When it's there, and I'm sure it will be great in some dimensions, and I'm sure it will be horrible in others. So I absolutely don't care. And yes, I might be one of the Linux fighter who are perfectly fine playing with completely silly devices. But I just don't care for it because I already know in advance part of the trade-off, the good versus bad dimension, is going to be good will be indeed some sleek design, which will include integration because they have the different hardware and software components, and the counterpart of it will be a walled garden or something that works maybe only with some other devices and definitely not fully with others. So that to me is already such a huge drawback that I'm going to look at it with a desire to learn for some of the good ideas, but it's definitely not going to lock the thinking or lock anything.
Let me ask you
one other device.
Fabien, with the greatest love and respect, I don't care about your perspective in the sense that you're not the average user. You're a very privileged person because of your mental attitude of experimentation. So the question is more, do you expect that in a year or so, if a family member who's not very technical or a friend says, oh yeah, no, I want to get into this VR thing, which headset should I get? And if they have sufficient money, don't you think you will most likely say, start with the Apple one? Remember, the iPhone is the biggest selling product in the history of humanity. Apple knows how to appeal to the average user and upgrade them while having limitations.
Sure. The thing is, I always I might suggest it to them. Are they going to be able to do something with it that I wouldn't be able to do at all with an alternative device? Are they going to surprise me so that I can learn from the usage? I hope so, but from a technical standpoint, I'm very skeptical. From a usage standpoint, or because they do a specific thing, let's say, I don't know, in math or geography or whatnot, absolutely. But are they going to do something technically that I can't do otherwise? I really doubt it. Is it going to still augment them or enable them themselves to do things that they were not able to do otherwise, for sure, or at least with what device they didn't have before, for sure.
I see Mark has his hand up, but one thing they're going to do is remove a lot of frustrations that we kind of take for granted. You know, when you put it on, you'll get what you want and you can do what you want. You won't have to set up with this or do with that. But anyway, yeah, sorry, Mark.
Yeah, I'm just thinking. I mean, I find myself in between sort of two camps in the sense of my approach is not a Luddite one at all. I mean, I think there are two halves to this. In a consumer sense, yes, it'll look very shiny and nice, and things will sort of be easy through integration. That integration will come at a lack of choice, because, and it's not just evil marketing. Or obviously, the more interconnections, the more odd things that you've got to deal with, the more chances are that things won't be smooth. So I suspect there will be limitations for pragmatic, just as much as marketing reasons. So if I'm ordinary member of the general populace and I want one of these things, I still haven't quite figured out why I'd want one, but if I wanted one, I'm sure it would be appealing in that sense. Whether it's going to move the needle for the sorts of things that we're looking at, I'm less certain. No, not in a hurry. Mainly because there's an awful lot to be built. The headset's just the start. It's what you see through the headset, and most of that's missing still, as we sort of know from some of our experiments.
Peter.
Well, what I'm hoping for is that they'll have some kind of an unwalled content model so that the actual underlying data can be out on a server somewhere that's accessible from other platforms. They'll be able to interoperate with the Apple headset. It'll just look cooler and have additional affordances if you're using the Apple hardware, but you'll be able to interact with the outside world, which means you'll be able to pull in content that people who aren't in the Apple platform have developed. And of course, if Apple doesn't want to do that, then we'll just have to hope that people will be able to jailbreak the Apple headset to be able to do real neat, cool things. Also, I'm very happy to report that I have been able to get my scaffolding up and operational. So we are now at the point where I'll be able to start doing substantive development that will be automatically packaged as a standard double-clickable Mac app at the end of the day. And I'd like to give you a quick screen share and show you that system real quick. So
you all avoided the main issue, but yeah, let's have a look at what you got, Peter. Just on a real brief thing before you go into this, all I'm saying is that whatever interface they develop is what most people will see and most people will think is the way it should be done. That's my fear. That's it. I think all the comments you made were very, very valid. Anyway, let's go into this.
Okay, so this was my fourth major revision of trying to get the tooling in place and operational. We are using a system called Electron, and what Electron does is it packages a copy of the Chromium web browser and the Node.js web server inside of a single application so that you're guaranteed that whatever platform it's running on, it will be the same version of the browser and the same version of the underlying web server. So any code you write will run on all platforms, essentially the same, except for some additional affordances that are platform specific, like interacting with the Windows taskbar, and you have clipboard support across platforms, a couple little subtleties like that. But as far as core functionality goes, it will work the same. So when you're doing a package like this, you have a package JSON file, and this lists all of the dependencies of the project. So we have the dependency list and a series of scripts. the way the system works is there's a front end and a back end that at the end of the day get packaged in the same application for production. But in the development stage, you run side by side a development server for the front end and a copy of Electron for the back end. So I'll be using the system version of Electron, and it will load content from the development server. So that means that as you're making changes to the code, they'll update in real time, which is really nice and awesome. So for instance, here we had blue 4, let's go to red 6, and instantaneously the app will update. And it will have access to system level utilities, like being able to open files, having a file watcher on the desktop to see whether a text file changes while the program is running, to be able to do interesting things. I haven't been able to pipe in any of the interesting things, but that'll be the next stage. This was just getting the shell working. When Electron loads, the very first thing that happens is you have a main process. Now I'm using IMBA as my programming language here as opposed to JavaScript, but the IMBA gets translated into JavaScript. So what Electron sees is a somewhat uglier version of that code. And IMBA has pre-processed it so I have the nicer IMBA notation for describing what's happening. When we kick off the system, we create the browser window using Chromium. Then we tell it to load either the index file, which would be in the case of the production mode, or to load the dynamic pointer into the development server if we're in development mode. As soon as the window's loaded, it will then run a preload script. The idea of the preload script in Electron is to be able to provide a way of passing information from the web server process to the web browser process. So you have a utility called expose in main world is critical, and that lets you take variables that are on one side of the bridge and make them available to the client code in your end user interface. So all this basically does is replaces text values for Node, Chrome, and Electron in the text. That's completely unnecessary. It could be done entirely on the client side. And also I'm sending in the environment that the program is running in and information about the process it's running. And that tells it whether it's in development mode or production mode. The environment itself comes from an environment file, which is just a way for me to be able to change the name of the program and control what port the server is running off of easily. When the system kicks off, it reads that file in, injects all those variables into the environment so that they're available anywhere. The next thing that happens is the preloader script hands control off to the web page that gets loaded in. On the web page, we load the renderer script. The renderer script down at the bottom is going to load the actual application that you're looking at now. So basically all this is basically a template that allows Electron to splice in the development version of the code or the precompiled backend version of things. Then the renderer program loads the app from app.imba and mounts it. So when it mounts it, that makes the app available to be running dynamically. The app itself is standard IMBA code that doesn't have to know anything about the environment it's running in. So this code would be the same whether it's running as a web page or running as a packaged Macintosh desktop app. So the only time you need to be running it as a packaged desktop app is if you want to be interacting with the file system. If we're just doing something that's going to be loading data off of the web, then we completely ignore that and we can just operate entirely as a traditional progressive web application to get at the data. The IMBA language itself has very nice notation that combines defining custom tags with CSS. So for instance, here, if we want, we can type some CSS right in. Color, let's say green 4. And when we do that, the text immediately updates. So you have our style sheet content embedded inside of the web application. There are also hooks for handling all kinds of runtime events, like whether you've moused over something, whether you dragged a file in off of the desktop. and we have all those kinds of affordances, and making use of them is the next step. But again, at this stage, all I wanted to do was make sure that I could have code that would be able to run as a web page, or also run as a packaged Macintosh desktop app with the ability to watch files on the file system. So all of this is currently working. Anybody who wants to play with it, I'll be happy to give you an archive of the code so you could play with it on your own systems. End of demo, and stopping the screen share before something breaks and ruins the flawless demo.
Thank you, Peter. Initial question.
Yep.
What type of thing would you like to build and run to do on there?
Okay, parsing visual meta, the library visualizations. I'd like to try to bring in one of the JavaScript-based 3D packages like A-Frame and see if I can start creating some 3D things as, 2D projections. So that's sort of where we're going.
I've
Also,
got one for you, Peter. So you said if you want to, I understand to the point that if you want to interact sort of fully as a sort of as a trusted entity on the host computer, in your case, you mentioned the Mac, you need to be an app, but presumably a halfway house to that is if you run basically a virtual server on your Mac, that certainly not everything, but the things, most of the sort of data type things you might want to get in, interact with could be available to you in a web style that way. Would that be true?
yeah, basically that's what's happening inside of Electron. You have both the server and the client running inside the same program as two separate processes that are talking to each other over that context bridge or using web style interactions. So there's also some inter-process communication hooks if you want to do that. And I currently have all of the security disabled so that the app will be able to do anything a desktop app would without having to jump through any unnecessary hooks, because I know I'm only dealing with my own content and I'm not dealing with untrusted third-party content. If
you're in a sense you're moving to almost sort of phone-like existence, because most people who don't do clever things with phones, but basically they don't have an operating system, they just get the files they need by the magic of the system.
Yeah.
And I don't, that's not an implied value judgment of that at all. It's just an observation of sort of shift in how we relate to things. I know I'd find it hard to let go of my file system, but there we go. That's just,
Yeah, so
that's just muscle memory.
So the very first application that I'm building with this is going to be the transpiler test bed, where I can type in the programming grammar in one pane of the window, have that automatically get saved out to disk, bidirectionally track any changes to the grammar file. That means it could be edited inside of the Electron app, or it could be edited with an external editor. And that lets us take advantage of VS Code or whatever your editor of choice is to edit the grammars. Then the file watcher inside the program would recognize that it's been changed, load in the new version of the grammar, then compile the grammar into a parser, apply the parser to test input, and then show us in the web user interface the output. So it's going to be a programming language workbench, basically, at the first stage. Then, of course, we can make use of those grammars once they're nicely ironed out in that system to do interesting end-user ultimate applications like parsing new versions of Visual Meta. So the test bed, this is the test bed of the scaffolding. Then you'll have the grammar test bed, which will let us tweak our parsing systems. And then after that, we could apply the parser that we tweaked using the grammar test bed in actual end-user applications. So I'm building tools to help me build the next set of tools. And of course, we can put this stuff out and it'll maybe attract some attention to the work that we're doing with the lab.
Yeah, it's interesting. It will be interesting to see specific work that can be done, of course.
but it's so good to not have to think about the tooling. And it turns out what was blowing everything up was I'd followed community advice to change node package management systems. The current system is based on NPM, which is the node package manager. It was the original, and it stores original copies of all of the libraries that you're using in application. And then a couple other package managers came out, and the current favorite is PNPM. And everybody said, convert all your work to PNPM. It's the bee's knees. Go and do it. So I moved to PNPM, and PNPM is much more stingy on its use of disk space. So what it does is it only saves one copy of every library that you download in a content addressable store, and then it builds a symbolic link at the operating system file management level from where you want to use the library to the single global unique copy of the library, which is absolutely wonderful, except it turns out all of the Electron tooling doesn't know about it. And it was all written on the assumption that it was dealing with real files that are redundantly copied in your project's node modules folder and not symbolic links in the folder to real folders that have the underlying libraries. And it took me the longest time to figure this out because all my stuff just seemed to be inexplicably breaking. And I couldn't figure it out until I managed to stumble onto an article where somebody said, there are some issues with PNPM, and if you run into a wall, just try reverting to the original NPM and see what happens. And sure enough, all the problems just instantly went away. So we're using a project called Electron Forge that doesn't know about PNPM to build and package the actual Mac app. And that just went kablooey when it was given symbolic links.
Maybe we should start thinking and talking about, I see a comment there, Mark, about workflows to support.
Oh,
Well,
definitely.
Does this relate to anything you guys are doing now, David or Mark? Can you benefit from this kind of wrapping?
It is related because we're stacking layers to each other, and we could simply start another process on top of the one normal web layer. We could start additional processes to bring in additional layers of information. Is that correct, Peter?
Yep. So actually it gets really complicated under the hood because I'm using IMBA for the source files that Electron's using to kick off its process. So what I really have is a pre-build command, which creates the main preload and renderer JavaScript files, which all of the Electron tooling needs, because the Electron tooling can't deal with the Vite package manager loading languages that the tooling didn't know about when the tooling was created. So I have to make sure that when the Electron related tooling looks, it's only finding ordinary JavaScript files as opposed to finding IMBA files. So first we pre-build that, then we do the regular build, which will compile the client side IMBA files into JavaScript files. And those two processes are sort of independent. So I have in development mode a file watcher watching for changes to the underlying scripts to make sure that the Electron process gets kicked off again when those script change happens. Otherwise, we can just leave the original Electron level process running and pick up any changes to the client side code using the front end bundler, which in our case is Vite, which everybody loves, and it's the new bee's knees, and it's replaced Webpack because it's a lot cleaner, and there's an incredible reduction in boilerplate compared to using the older bundler versus the new one. So I was really tooling hell for about 2 weeks there, but now I don't have to think about it anymore. And best of all, it applies to all of my future projects. So this will just be the scaffolding template that everything else will use. And now I can think at a higher level and forget about all of these low-level packaging and file management details.
I see your hand there, Mark.
Yes. So, well, in relation to your question, I suppose some of this is pertinent because I'm just about to start. Got involved in a university project, so I'll be doing this sort of part time. But the gist of it is that it's helping metadata in the physical sciences. So it's actually coming out of a chemistry group, so it's centered around lab books. But the interesting thing is what they've, after I think several false starts in their community, is they've realized that the easy thing is counting the countable stuff, which is sort of traditional metadata. But rather like the sort of failure of the failure of the success of the semantic web and in turn the open linked data communities is that they're terribly good at making very complex data structures. They're appallingly bad at making data that ordinary humans can use. And so one of the interesting things about the project I'm getting involved in is looking at actually how you build a more I don't know what the word for it is. But it's the interface. It's the bit between the hard edge of the structure of the system and somebody thinking, well, why would I even want to use this? There's all this information. How might I use it? Because I think the dirty secret of most metadata is it's of most use. It's of most use to the person that collected it, and even then, possibly not so much use to them a couple of years later when they forgot why they collected it. So it should be interesting to try and help break out of that loop. Yeah, Fred.
One of the things, the corrections for my thesis is they want me to define interface, and I basically refuse to do so. Don't worry, there's a way around it. I'm not just being me. But the other point is you're talking about metadata, and this is for clarification. It's not to teach you anything. You know this better than me. There are, of course, different kinds of metadata.
Yeah.
Not just the kind of countable and also countable. This is one of the more interesting things of my PhD work has been to look at that. A lot of people, when they hear the word metadata, think about intercepted phone calls and that kind of stuff. So, there is the external metadata about the movement of things.
Mm-hmm.
But even it's really interesting because I think it's a poor term because primarily, as you know very well, in Visual Meta, the metadata is for free and it is what was already there. That's all it is, right? Mm. That's one kind of metadata. I think you're talking about descriptive metadata.
Yeah, I because I think people are beginning to, at last stop thinking that the solution is just yet more technology. It is. So there's nothing. The technology is really good. What's missing is the sort of human in the loop, and what we've forgotten to construct is a way to make all this clever stuff we've collected more accessible to people without them having to sort of learn lots of things they don't already know. And it's nobody's fault, but I think we've collectively,
But in terms of the technology, and it's a shame David is not here right now, because I think a lot of what in actuality is metadata is really the stuff what describes what it is in it. My earliest excitement about metadata comes from the game Crisis, which I don't think I ever played. And I'll briefly remind you in case I've told you before. In an interview in Edge magazine, one of the lead developers was asked, saying, "Oh my God, this is such an amazing big open world game, one of the first. How did you make the AI so intelligent?" And he said, "Oh no, that wasn't the problem. Making the AI intelligent is quite easy. The key is to make the environment be aware of itself." So there the metadata would be for this tree, it can burn, yes. It needs this much force to break. It is this level of translucent, when it comes to leaves and stuff. So if you have that kind of metadata, which I don't think is normally thought of as metadata, it may be Windows people may just call it properties. that is what allows an environment to come to life. So in relation to what you're saying, Mark, I think that if the data stuff, not to use the word metadata, is presented in a way, and this is exactly agreeing with you, that maps onto what the user experience is, such as no one would play a computer game if it was in a spreadsheet. But of course, in a way, it is in a spreadsheet. You just have an incredible interface to that spreadsheet.
Yeah, I mean, it's allowing people to sort of say, well, so there's all this, information about this thing. Well, how's it interesting? What does it actually tell me? And very few things give you that descriptive layer. So it is very much akin to what you're saying. And I think that, but it's the bit we've got to fix is the human side of the fence, not the technical side of the fence. We need to start asking ourselves what are the questions we need to be able to answer? Because at the moment there are sort of a mismatch, both sides falling short, where the human side is just saying, don't make me think, where's the answer button? And on the design side, people have built very clever and complex, but quite hard-edged systems that are actually remarkably hard for the majority of people who don't have sectoral, experience of that thing. To get to grips with, and especially that the bridge will often be through someone who is sort of essentially a managerial person who is incentivized to not understand anything about it. So you really do need some bridging metaphors that that people can sort of design for and work with, because I think as David said, I mean, I think the point about AI is absolutely true. Because so one of the things we need to be saying is, well, what do we want the AI to help us do? At the moment, we've got these toys that people keep making that are very clever, and they excite some and alarm others, but they're not things I don't think anybody asked for. What we haven't got is AI that's actually doing helpful things for us. Outside use in very defined, sort of pattern matching in very defined circumstances where it's doing really good work, but this thing of helping us interact with the systems, and that bit I think has been slow to develop.
I'm just opening a corrections document here. What's happening to sometimes the Mac just okay. I think the language is really, really interesting. Hello, Fabian. In summary, we've been talking about metadata, but we've been trying to avoid using the term because it's very loaded. And we've been talking about how making metadata stuff is helpful maybe for the person doing it, like making a stamp collection or something. That's one thing. But we've been also talking about different kinds of metadata. Metadata which is descriptive, meaning somebody else put it on to say this bit is that bit, and that's kind of like library metadata. Then there is what I call inherent metadata, such as this is a heading and so on in the document. It's just taking what was in the manuscript and putting it into the whatever world, PDF, visual meta, whatever. And Mark said a really good word, and that's why I went into my document here, because I've been asked to define interactive and richly interactive for my thesis, and I don't want to do that. I mean, I will, but it's interesting. Why not? Here's the thing. What it comes down to, I think, one more thing for Fabian, because we're talking about a computer game. Every single thing in a computer game has to have properties. Otherwise, you can walk through a wall, or you can, burn water or do whatever it is, right? But we don't call that metadata necessarily. It's a different kind of data about the data. So the final word that I thought was so great for Mark was he used the word experience. So I think that is really, really key. How can this data be experienced? And of course, that's a very leading XR question, isn't it? So if you have a lot of either descriptive or structural or whatever metadata it is, that is exactly what XR opens up opportunities for, new ways to experience it. I think in the same way we used to have interface design and then became experience design, and all those words were used. We probably now need to talk about this kind of data in terms of, it's on our website, we keep talking about it, experimenting to experience. Oh yeah, Mark, obviously.
Yeah, just a thought listening to you say that is that I'm just realised I'm in another thing's happening. I'm seeing yet another turn of the screw where there's sort of really clever visualization stuff being done that I can really see most of the people who are going to want to use it won't be able to use, because the one thing that's not explained is how you take the information you have, the metadata, if you will, and use it. So we do this classic thing. We start from we have the pretty picture. We see the pretty picture. We imagine what we have being like an even nicer for us copy of that pretty picture, and then there's this big gap in between, and no one and nothing to help us do that. Nothing that sort of says, well, if you want to make one of these, you sort of need to think in these terms, or you need to ask this sort of question. That's always missing. Because it seems to be presumed that you just know how to do these things, and it's a very, very persistent theme in the visualization world, which is ironic, really, because it's this enormous roadblock.
Okay.
To it's getting
All right, Mark. Since you're coming into my world there, just before you, David, if you don't mind, just directly back on Mark. Thank you. I come from a visual arts background. Photography, painting, all that stuff. I have degrees in this kind of stuff from Chelsea School of Art when it was still called that. And it makes me so annoyed when people talk about the future is going to be pictures or this or that. So it takes an enormous amount of energy to make it, and skill and knowledge. How many people can make a moving, intelligent documentary that's even 15 minutes long? I mean, we can all do it if we put in the time and effort, but actually writing down the stuff is probably easier.
No, I think I understand what you're saying, but I think it's.
I'm not there yet. I'm not there yet, Mark. I'm not there yet. So even making these really useful illustrations or visualizations, it takes a lot of skill, and this is where you may or may not disagree with me, but the Broad Street pump in London. The illustration of where all the wells were, and that's why the cholera outbreak, that was made after the fact. It wasn't a thinking tool. He basically had charts, and then he needed to persuade someone else, and then he did it. So I do agree with you, Mark, that making really good visualizations is crucial, but it's also very, very hard because it's such a.
I think that's the wrong way to look at it, if I may. I don't in any way disagree with your point about these things are hard, and I don't in any way wish to sort of suggest that what's being produced is simple or poor. The problem is a different one. It's this lack of thinking through the human interface experience part of it, which is that there is a system that can make you something akin to this, whether it's dynamic or static. Because I certainly know that most good images I see that are static have been massively retouched, which goes back to very much what you were saying. It doesn't look nice just by chance. But for a lot of things, we just want to create something, an abstract, a visual abstract of information, for instance. And the thing that's remarkably hard and remarkably poorly done in general is how you take the information you have, or the understanding, it may be that you don't have, in a sense, lots of ones and zeros in nice little boxes, but you have an understanding of your subject. You say, right, what I want to be able to do is I want to be able to represent this subject in that way. There's times that, well, the things you need to collect, and you need to collect them in this sort of way. That's never there, because that somehow assumed that this is just, I don't know. I don't know how people assume it's done. But I just got sent by, the other problem it creates is, for instance, I just got sent as an outreach thing for the Hypertext conference this year. Someone sent this amazing dashboard that was fun and did wonderful things until I tried verifying the data, at which point I couldn't verify a single piece of data is correct, because it transpires that probably this is automatically scraped data that no one has quality sampled at all. So the visualization is actually a complete lie, although it's pretty, which again goes to the same point, that if the sort of that bit of getting from the things to the picture you create is a somebody else job, it doesn't bode well for us.
Yeah, I agree every point, David.
Yeah, this conversation is really interesting, and I was noticing the different types of metadata that we're talking about and how different people would be the ones to actually supply it potentially. You mentioned the ones that are pulled directly from an object. I guess it's like how your visual system works, where they're the headline or some other aspects of it, and those could be done through the computer. Don't even need really human intervention. Then you have these, for example, the properties of the visual world. These are things that would be done by the world maker, the person who's constraining it. Then you have these other more descriptive metadata that would be potentially created by the author, but they certainly don't have to be. And the author can't be thought to know everything, for one thing, and they don't have interest in everything as well. So potentially other people can do this other set of labeling. And I wanted to also throw out another category that I find really interesting, and I would say it's relational metadata. So it's really about how pieces of information can connect. I'm very interested in the context of things. So if we can have a kind of metadata that allows us to connect different objects, that's really interesting and useful, I think.
That's a very nice angle to talk about relational metadata. Thank you. Absolutely. I think one of the things we're talking about here is one of the normal nice streams would be to have a timeline that everybody could throw things onto, because then you have a spine. So Mark, you can then look at if someone else has put something on and wasn't actually in the right spot, or if it was fake, you can check if it is correct. Similarly with a globe, for geographic information. But when it comes to other types of knowledge, there aren't any default ways of looking at it, except for maybe XY and maybe XYZ for some kinds of things. So to be able to have it open for import and export, yes, absolutely 100% crucial. Even if in normal apps today, it is difficult to check things, and that has to be core to what it is. And as we keep developing our VR rooms, you could imagine in about 10 years, like we talked about last year, you open a data set and then you have like 20 rooms you can have a look at, see which one fits your way of viewing it, because you've defined things in all these different rooms, and then tweak it like mad. But one thing we shouldn't forget is to be able to interact with these things. There's nothing wrong with saying you need to learn the skills. It's such a bizarre field we're in. If you want to be a fighter pilot or a traditional pilot, learn it. If you want to be a doctor, get top grades, learn it, etc. If you want to be an athlete, if you want to play a musical instrument, learn it. If you want to use computer stuff, oh no, the computer should be easy to use and it should bend to your wishes and it should magically think what you want. You shouldn't possibly have to learn anything, because then it's a bad system. Oh my God, what is this? As my professor Ed said in Syracuse many years ago, we also need to upgrade the user.
I mean, there is such a thing as data literacy.
As what? I didn't hear you.
Data literacy.
Yes.
Literacy for data. That doesn't mean everybody has to become a programmer. And I always chuckle when I hear about like digital natives, or the kids with their phones and whatnot. Because I don't remember, I think it was a book called La Petite Poussette, and how kids they know one motion, they scroll up and scroll down with a thumb, and without having any notion about what is a file, what is a directory, basically how through some levels computer work. So I think, I personally, every time I hear about kids or naturals, or anybody, kids is just one example, but anybody is a natural with tools. I usually think about people consuming information that has been very nicely wrapped for commercial purposes, but it's completely different from a tool. And a tool, let's say a hammer or welding or whatnot, does indeed require some expertise. And yeah, it's not again to be, let's say, elitist and say, oh, it's good that things have steep learning curves. It's not. I wish everything had no learning curves, but in practice they do. And when people decide not to invest time in one tool or another, being the computer, being software to analyze it, data literacy, notebooks and whatnot. Yeah, I have a bias because I did invest years and I keep on investing a lot of my time in it. So I don't want to, let's say, ignore this or be in a situation of privilege and know like, oh, people decide not to. But I also, yeah, I invest a lot of time in this, and I understand some people don't want to, but of course, it has consequences.
Yeah, there was a great phrase in there, but in practice, you need practice to get good at anything. Mark?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with your point about, I think absolutely we need to learn things, but I think that there's a sort of an unintentional conceit in that, which normally means we're normally saying people ought to know what I know. And I think it's an area, certainly with a lot of our new technology, it's especially bad in that sense. It sort of goes one or two directions as being so horrendously oversimplified that it's great and it does, well, rather as we talked about with the new headset earlier, it'll do great, but there are lots of things that you, if you're some power user, you might not be able to do and you might want to do. What's missing? The reason people are unskilled is that I don't think we have collectively expended much effort in thinking what the training is that's needed. We just assume that if you go and learn the micro skills, but I don't think everyone does need to be a very good programmer or a very good artist or something. It's some of the bits in the middle that is missing. And it is at the end of the day about skilling. The problem is that the skills are just not defined. And I just see, I mean, it's a reflection, I guess, that comes out of years of, well, I was going to say teaching people to use sort of thinking tools, but I think that sounds wrong because it sounds sort of, in a sense, pretentious in a way I don't mean. But it's not so much they're thinking tools, but where they're using tools to manipulate for a further purpose. So they're not creating an end product as such. They're working through their annotations to discover things. They're not making a picture, or they're not making a work of art, or they're not making some structure. And in that, a lot of the teaching is actually ends up, in a sense, being about thinking and, well, sort of abstraction with a very small a, thinking about actually what you're trying to do and not over concentrating on where you want to get to. Because a lot of the problem comes because people, it's a bit like the person who gets their room painted by telling the painter it's the color's wrong and to start over, instead of actually explaining the color they wanted in the first place. And I think, and I don't exclude myself, we're remarkably bad at doing that.
Okay, so the first thing about when you said about teaching is about, kind of the arrogance of they just don't have what's in my head. Yeah, that's what teaching is on a basic level. And yeah, you do need to learn the mechanics. There's no question about that. But as with everything, language itself, absolutely. But now we're really in the realm of education, and education should be upgraded. I don't think there's any question about that. But in terms of within the capability space that we have, I think one of the first things we need to do is make these things possible, these experiences or interactions or whatever we want to call them. That is an important part of it, because right now there are real barriers. And I think with the upcoming augmented worlds, AR, VR, whatever, those barriers will go up. They'll be worse. They'll be more owned, because it's harder to to make your own space. I'm really worried about that. I do also, yeah, I mean, some of the, it's funny. I think we're almost arguing around a shared position here, because I'm not saying everybody should be a graphic designer any more than Fabian is saying everybody should be a coder. Although, of course, our styles pull us in those directions. You know, I would like people to know a little bit more Photoshop, so to speak. But what is the central thing we're actually arguing here or discussing? I think we may have started talking in a circle a little bit.
Well, let me take another stab at it. Part of it, since we're talking about teaching, is sort of engagement teaching, which instead of starting from the premise that this is how I do this, these are all the things I know that enable me to do this, is saying, no, to understand what I do, you need to understand the following. So you don't need to know everything I know, unless you want to be the sort of the skill that I am. But in order to usefully interact with me, or for instance, you know, to enable me to help use my skill to help you, here are the things that you need to understand. You know, this is how the things that I do work. These are the sort of precepts it works off. And in that sense, so this speaks back to things like, well, what do we want AI to do for us? You know, and you've raised the point. So in a visual environment, what are the sort of interactions we think we might want to do? What are the things that we want to pull across the boundary between, in a sense, our close reality and the virtual ones? And I don't claim to know the answers to those, but I think that sort of area is not well sort of covered, and it's and you know, it's a gap that holds us back.
One thing that I think everybody needs to do, and very few people do it very well, is interpret information that's online. And the problem with just trying to tell people or teach them how to do that better, how to become more information literate, is that you actually need a whole suite of tools that don't exist really, that would enable people to actually become more information literate. And it's very difficult with today's web without those tools to actually do a good job of it.
I'm not sure if I agree. And the reason for that is this is a little bit, I'm going to ape Mark's comment earlier. I think that is a little bit of, if only people knew what I know about this subject, because I've already checked it out, other people should have tools. Because, you know, I'm looking, I've told you guys a little bit of the book I'm reading on the connectome, excuse me, in the brain, right? And it's because I've been trying to figure out where personality comes from. And it's very relevant to this part of the conversation because, sorry, some of you will have heard this and know this, but when the brain grows in the infant, it smells where the brain cells should go. It's amazing. It's a chemical soup, and they go here and they go there. And then in the future, we have this dense network of neurites, axons and dendrites. You know, here's a couple doing something about this and something about that. When you learn something, it doesn't actually happen that, oh, this is about weekdays and this is about evenings. Oh my God, we must pull each other together. That isn't actually what happened. What happens is there's got to be an overlap where they just touch. And sometimes that turns into a synapse, a connection. And if it does that, then there's a potential for those things to be connected, and it's random. You know, I think this is, with all due respect, scary as fuck. You know, so the basic underlying potential connections in our brain are random. So what flows for this that I think is really relevant is we don't have complete opportunity to change our brains. but we need to be careful what connections we choose to make, because they are the ones that are going to provide the framework for future connections. And that's why I think it comes down to ethics and morality. You know, if you believe in God, you are going to be pulled in a certain direction. If you're an atheist, a certain direction. I'm not making value judgments here, but you know, if you attribute everything to the act of God, then everything will be literally in your brain dotted like that. You won't be able to see another way of seeing it. So this is why I think we need in classrooms to bring back niceness and kindness. I mean, in Britain right now, we have the problem of our government wanting to drown people on the channel. It's absolutely obscene. And, you know, and you have a footballer pointing out that this is similar to the language used in Germany in the 30s, the top #1 paid presenter in the country. And the language literally is, you know, it's just like, look at it and compare. People have even done it with ChatGPT just to see what that kind of analysis would say. You know, that's scaring me from my ethical side. Someone who is on the other ethical side may find it just as scary, but from the opposite position. So I don't think this is about facts, about how many people cross the channel, to use that example, or who they are, or all these things. A lot of it is to do with your inbred morality. But I will say one more thing on this. I had because of my stroke, I'm doing all kinds of medical things. So I went to have blood drawn about a week ago. And the phlebotomist who was doing it, she was actually the one who urged me to deal with my tachycardia. So I got an ablation and all of that stuff. So in a loose sense, I kind of owe her my life, right? So I have a lot of goodwill towards this person. For some reason, while we're doing the blood thing, the notion of immigrants came up. And, you know, we've hosted 7 immigrants, as you all know, for exactly a year yesterday. There was a bit of a celebration that 4 of them have now found a new home, which is weird. Anyway, it came up and she was really upset. She really doesn't like immigrants. And she said it was because, you know, she's worked for the NHS, the National Health Service, her whole life. She can't afford this. She's suffering like that. Real grievances, you know, and because of my warm feelings towards her, I didn't bite her head off. And, you know, kindly through the discussion, all I kept repeating, and she finally completely agreed, was the government currently, and I'm not talking about politics now, I'm talking about means of communication, okay? So let's not worry about the politics, is that you, NHS nurses, you should be supported, there's no question, but it's not a zero-sum game. You know, if someone is here with the proper channels, they should have exactly the same benefits as you, no more or no less, because she also thought that immigrants were treated better. That's a big myth. So there, I agree with you, David. That is something that is spreading in the UK, that immigrants are sitting in fancy hotels and stuff. It's not true. Having lived with immigrant refugees for a year, I can promise you it's not true. But the point was that to have this discussion, at the very end of it, she said, you know, you've really changed my perspective on this. You know, if someone is here, if they have been allowed to go through the right channels, and they are here, they should have been taken care of. But yes, the government should be taking care of all of us. You know, so that was one of those rare moments where I can imagine the chemicals in her head. She got to vent. She was talking really horrible stuff, but, you know, it was okay in that safe space. And she literally rewired herself after that. I don't think technology can help us with these things, but we are, what's that, Peter?
In New York City, they're giving illegal immigrants beautiful hotel rooms. They're giving them food that they're throwing out. And now the mayor's offering them free tuition. It's just...
Hang on, they're giving them food that they're throwing out? That's awful. They should throw it in the bin.
It's just going into the dumpsters. They're providing the food. The immigrants don't like the food and they're just leaving it, and then it's getting discarded and thrown away. It's causing a tremendous amount of tension and anger in the general population, because you have people who can't afford to spend one weekend in a hotel room, seeing people who've arrived illegally getting nice, classy hotel rooms handed to them with cable TV in them, and they get food provided free of charge. Now the mayor wants to give them tuition to community college free of charge. And meanwhile, we have citizens who can't afford tuition to community college and who are starving, seeing the food being thrown away. So it's causing a tremendous amount of tension locally now.
So what do you think should be done, Peter?
They should come in legally, and if they're not here legally, they should be sent back to their home country to get on the end of the list. It's not fair to the people who want to come here legally through the process if they just show up on the shores and start draining resources that our own poor people desperately need. I mean, that's the real thing that calls it. And people don't begrudge them the idea of trying to help people who are in need, but citizens who've been paying taxes, who are following the laws, should come before people who have arrived illegally, and that's not what we're having now.
It's interesting in this discussion because it does mirror my discussion with this nurse. You point to the solution as being removing from one group rather than adding to the other group. Why would your perspective not be the citizens who are already there should be supported better?
Oh, I definitely want citizens who are already here to be supported better, but there aren't enough resources to go around, and
what do you mean there's not enough resources?
The non-citizens are being prioritized over new arrivals who violated the law in coming here, and that's what drives people absolutely nuts. That's probably why Trump's able to get so much support from the general public.
Well, his wife was an illegal immigrant. She came in under false pretenses. So that's a good point. But you see, these discussions are really, really important now. And it's also really, really difficult to have these discussions. And I do agree with David that this is an example where information would actually help a little bit. For instance, there was actually a riot in a city in England a couple of weeks ago where on social media, it had been shared that these immigrants were living in these fancy hotels. It was completely untrue. So that's an example that should be verifiable. So also, when
they
you
probably saw the fancy hotels the New York immigrants are getting and assumed it was happening there too.
Well, I mean, there are certain. Well, first of all, it may be useful to actually research the actual numbers, because I assume it is as cold in New York City as it is in most other places at the moment. So, having people freeze in the streets may not be the best idea. And also, if there are so few cheaper places to have them, they may have an overflow issue. I don't know. But, it's difficult to argue from anecdote. I see we have a hand from the mainland. That's you, Fabian.
Yes, I'm coming. My headphones were out of battery, so I had to drop them. So I hope you still hear okay. It was on a different topic, which was mask mandate, and somebody who was explaining that there was a study that has been misrepresenting the result, a research study saying basically masks were helpful or not helpful. And I was arguing that the information itself is not actually, I'm not convinced that better information would help in this case, either for immigration or for masks, in the sense that before receiving the information, there is, in my opinion, or from my understanding, there is a filter from the ideology standpoint. And
yeah, absolutely.
You can give new information, you can give precise information, verifiable information, everything you want. But if it doesn't somehow confirm my belief, or it doesn't do with my ideology, I'm going to not even hear them, not even see that information, in even less verify it. So I think for sure we can all benefit, regardless of political standpoint, from better information. But I'm not sure that providing better information helps to, let's say, bridge gaps or hear each other, actually.
Well, I agreed with you for quite a lot of this, but I think that for the sake of argument, Peter and I are having a discussion around one specific issue: illegal immigrants being treated better by having nice hotels in New York City. Because we are both civil and we care about each other, we're not, in a street protesting. It would be interesting, I think, and useful if the numbers were available from a relatively objective source, where, let's say, it shows that like 20% of illegal immigrants were having, staying at the Waldorf, which is a shit hotel, but it's got a nice reputation. Then I may very well be swinging over to Peter's perspective. But if it turns out that it's been a few hundred and it was a one-off and there was a reason, Peter may say, oh, well, that was bullshit. So I think it can help. but also when it comes to the kind of morality behind it, there is a layer above as well, and this goes to kind of David's connective metadata in a very abstract sense, I think. For instance, in the UK, what the Conservative government have been doing for the 12 years is squeezing things to the point of breaking, such as the NHS. And when they get close to breaking, they can say, oh, well, it's so shit, it's not working, we've got to privatize it. So there's been something happening behind the scene from one ideology, which puts another ideology closer to happening. The reason we have this discussion about immigrants in boats right now is very likely very little to do with the immigration. Most of the people in power are actually immigrants themselves, first or second generation in the UK. But as you've all seen over the last few years, the Tories' record has been awful. They don't have the personalities to win. They don't have the policies. They don't have the record. We have the worst economy in Europe, all kinds of things, blah, blah, blah. So what are they doing? They're throwing up an issue to divide us. And I'm not talking politics now. I'm just saying, when we're looking at comparing this and this, we, the citizenry, maybe comparing it for a reason, it may be kind of stirred up. So we focus on that and not something else. So that gets to the bigger picture of how can us with relatively different worldviews actually work together to make something more useful. David.
Yeah, this is an really interesting conversation. One tool that I think is, I mean, it's not an actual tool, but one thing that I think would be always useful when you're looking at a piece of information is as much context as there is. Right now, my main thing about the web is you look at a piece of information, there's very, very little context because a lot of commercial sites don't even want to use links right now. So that's one thing. This is a little bit off topic, but I saw this talk by Dave Snowden the other day, and he was talking about how groups of people can basically innovate together, make decisions together, and what he said was, really, you need to put people in groups of less than 5, and ideally about 3. And he also, was fascinating as well. He said one of those persons should be over 50, another person should be under 25, because the 25-year-olds they're not, their mind hasn't been cemented in place. They're very innovative, coming up with different ideas. The older people they've got supercharged empathy by that time in their life. And so put them in groups of 3, but the important thing is that these groups of 3 that would get together to innovate or make decisions, they would all aggregate up. So you get the benefit of the crowd, but so anyway, there's something really interesting there. And then the last thing that I wanted to just mention was this problem with people and information is only going to get worse with AI. We're coming to the point where these videos, the deep fake videos, are going to be very simple for people to do, probably within seconds or minutes within the next 2 or 3 years, I think, maybe even sooner. But it's going to make the whole information integrity, much less information integrity on the web. I feel like we're going to be flooded with a ton of information. A lot of it's going to be just either misinformation, disinformation, or clickbait.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. It's kind of interesting. We all here in the community agree that climate change is a real and serious threat, and we need to invest in how to deal with it. But there's another thing, and that is military. A year or 2 ago, I think all of us here would have agreed that America particularly spends way too much money on the military. It's absolutely obscene. It's just horrible. They should be investing in many other things. And then we look at Putin today. Thank God America did what they did. It is the fact that we have to fight both physically and through demonstration, both China and Russia at the moment, is something we couldn't foresee. And all these amazing things that America has done, and let's say America's military efforts have been wasted 50%. at this point, I'm very grateful. I'm very, very grateful for that work. And I think similarly, we need to define and look at where else to invest. We all agree here that we should invest in infrastructure for thinking and communication. But also when it comes to issues political like immigrants, how much effort should we invest in that, in dealing with it? And should we invest it in a way that costs money by sending people back? Or should we invest by having better relations with the countries they come from and better assimilation? You know, these are real issues. There's a lot of things we need to invest in, and we have to decide where we really think we should. For me, I want Edgar to grow up in a healthy and prosperous world. So for having universal health insurance or health as we have in the UK is absolutely crucial. Edgar does not benefit at all if there's a kid down the road who doesn't get this. It makes his world worse. So even from the most selfish perspective, it's absolutely insane. And when it comes to, you know, immigrants, we happen to have a couple of legal ones. You know, what's the difference between them and the rest? It was a mainland Europe attack. You know, I'm not making a big political speech here, but I am saying that as communities, we need to have the after dinner discussions to decide where we want to invest our time, resources, and efforts, and where not. It's not necessarily straightforward, even for people who are, you know, nice and decent people and care about each other. Yeah, Mark?
Yeah, I just, the things I was missing in this is that invariably, you know, we speak as if we have knowledge of the subject and we speak as if there are easy solutions. And the reality is most of the time, people are not very good, you know, results of a bad job. By which I mean that I do notice we're far too ready to assume malice of the very worst kind by people who basically are, you know, probably working beyond their means in a subject, in a problem they don't particularly understand. And I think, you know, a little humility helps in that. I mean, the first thing I did when I was at university, my first job at sea was in Hong Kong, where we were picking up Vietnamese boat people who were in a very parlous state, fleeing a rapacious regime, and economic migrants from South China who were coming for a better job in Hong Kong. And we pick them both up together and treat them equally. One of the things, hearing people talk about food, one of the things we didn't do was give them our food, because they wouldn't have recognized it and wouldn't want to eat it because they tastes and textures they didn't know. And we sort of, you know, again, we overlook these things that, you know, you don't have to go a long distance before, you know, people have quite different customs and things around things like what they eat, and it's just these little things I think get overlooked a lot, and yet we waste an awful lot of time in argumentation and assuming that if we only explain our argument better, people understand. That's not what they're misunderstanding, and that's partly driven by also far too much partisanship. So, you know, it's much better to say the government of country X is doing a really bad job, rather than saying the country of government X run by party Y, because that's immediately putting an unnecessary slant into it. If the state is bad, the state is bad, and it's something that decent people should worry about. But it's sort of no wonder if we rush to partisanship that we find that things don't work, because it's offering a very easy vector for people to disagree. And that's why I'm not surprised that so many of these argumentation models fall at the first hurdle.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there for sure. Yeah, I mean, of course, making assumptions, I agree with you, but there are some more and some less clear things of what might be edge cases. And, you know, to have, I mean, Peter, just to help for I know we're out of time and I actually have to run, but it's kind of a thing. But what is your position on universal healthcare? If you're still here. We've lost the Peter, I think. Yeah, I mean, a lot of this comes, you know, you're talking about different kinds of foods and stuff. I guess different kinds of foods is a microcosm for cultures as well. What you're used to, what your expectations are. In America, of course, they have this word called freedom that very rarely is defined. Because, of course, you have freedom to and you have freedom from. And for some reason, the people who talk more about freedom are the ones who hate liberty, liberals. So I think not that we should just do knowledge graphs and agree with each other, absolutely not. But I do think that discussions on higher level concepts of how we relate to them may be useful. You know, what does it mean to take care of each other? Question of that comes into who do you mean by each other? Who do you include in that? What do you mean by take care? Does it mean nanny state where the government does a lot of things for you and without your control, like Denmark at the moment? Or does it mean this or that? So anyway, discourse is important and we're looking at different ways to deal with it. So I think that's a good closing point. As far as the next symposium, not demo day, but symposium, what time of year should we think of? September, October, November, something like that? And unless I get something useful from Vint, we'll probably end up doing it in London, or are there preferences for somewhere else? I am totally happy to travel about a bit. Okay, London's all right. Are the Americans thinking of crossing?
I would consider it. I just need to see what's happening when we're closer in. I have a really hard time predicting my life these days, but yeah, I would love to.
Yeah, no, that's good. Okay. Let's see where we can come to, and I look forward to seeing you guys next week. We will be sticking to the UK timetable, as in Europe timetable. Is that okay? Considering the summertime and all of that stuff, or is that an awkward time?
Works for me.
Is it just so sort of for anyone listening to, because it's the 26th of March is when UK changes, so it's about another week and a half. So sort of 2 weekends where we're still out of sync. Because sometimes it's a week, and this year it seems to be 2.
Yeah,
it was 2.
All right. Have a good week, guys. Sorry about the interruption yesterday, and yeah, look forward to next week.
See y'all.
Take care. Bye bye.
Bye.